Good morning, everyone. I guess it's nice to see so many people. I think it's fair to say that yesterday was extremely busy, quite manic. So I think it's quite nice that today's calmed down a little bit, certainly for some of us who are going to be manning the stands. My name's Declan Hannon. I work for a technology company called Coincover that provides theft protection services to ensure people are prevented and protected against loss. Now, I'm not going to be talking much about our technology in this presentation, but I do hope you'll meet us at our stand just behind the stage and speak to myself and my colleague Ryan at some point throughout the day. Now, I'm going to be talking about potentially quite a controversial topic, the image problem that crypto has as an industry. And I think there's a lot of people who would argue there isn't an image problem. I mean, I think there is, and I'm really going to be taking the opportunity to walk you through it. So I'll be touching upon why I think there's a bit of an image problem, the current landscape of threats that it exists. And this might be a little bit different from so many of the talks and speeches that you'll be listening to yesterday and today. What you'll be hearing is about all of these fantastic opportunities, right? The amazing innovations, the marvels that are going to skyrocket crypto. And all of this is true. But I do think we also have to acknowledge the fact that there are a significant number of risks and threats that could potentially slow down that drive to mass adoption. Because ultimately the vision of crypto is that globally there is an embrace of blockchain technology and that it is used by the masses to bank the unbanked. And I think if we can identify some of the issues that could potentially slow this down, as an industry we can move forwards far more efficiently. Now, when it comes to the image problem itself, I guess perhaps the easiest way to sum it up would be safety, or a perceived lack of safety. Now, I always try to think of relevant or close to, relevant or recent examples when I'm giving talks, to audiences. And in our industry, it's not very difficult to find them. And that's because it's an industry that's moving so fast and evolving so quickly that often it's very difficult to keep up with all of the changes that are taking place. Now, one of the examples I'll use is actually somebody who's pretty crypto aware, so not a new entrant to the industry, not somebody who should have known better. It's the CEO of Defiance. Now, only recently he was hacked for $1.8 million. And when I dug a little bit deeper to try and understand why, what had happened is he'd seen a link that he believed to be from one of his companies, he'd clicked it, and as a consequence of that, the hackers had been able to gain access to his computer. Now, this is where it gets a bit interesting, right? Because this is someone who knows the industry very well. He knows what the threats are, but clearly his private key was stored on that computer because they were then able to drain that wallet and take those assets. Only 4 days ago, another example, an article was published around the creators of the MEV bots, that they built a back door that would allow them to drain wallets. 6 users' wallets had already been drained of ETH, but there's still another 13,000 users that are potentially at risk. Now, the creators have completely disappeared from the internet, but the fact is that those risks still exist. So that's one of the key areas I'm going to be talking about, but there are a couple of other areas that I think are important as well. Skepticism amongst governments and financial institutions. Now, whenever I say this particular one, I often get, well, why do we care? Why does it matter? I think the real point is that it exists. And the fact remains that there is skepticism, and ultimately skepticism from, nation states and from large financial institutions are potentially going to create barriers, again, to that mass adoption and global use of crypto as a currency. And then finally, lack of regulation. Now, this is a particularly contentious point, right? Because there is a valid argument that a lack of regulation creates a free economy that can grow and expand far more quickly. But I think we also have to highlight that a lack of regulation can also create a potential risk for the citizens that are operating with the currencies. But if we take a step back a second and we think about hacks as a whole, some of you might be a bit surprised by the number on the screen behind me, right? A 185% increase in hacks and loss throughout 2021. Now, when I see a number like that, I guess the question I have to ask is, why? Is our industry particularly easy to hack? Do we have no interest in security or industry? Well, no, of course we do. And actually, to hack these companies, which are typically smaller exchanges, is not an easy thing to do. It requires a significant level of investment, a large number of people, and a huge amount of time. So why is it that we're seeing an increase in hacks more and more and more? Even in 2022, there's been over 72 already this year. Well, actually, if you take a step back, you start to see the bigger picture. The crypto industry as a whole is still, for all intensive purposes, relatively new. It's a startup industry, right? Certainly when you compare it to more traditional sectors like banking. You know, if you compare it to someone like the Bank of America, whose CSO has an unlimited cybersecurity budget, you start to understand not that crypto is necessarily unsecure, it's just not as mature. And I think that's a really, really key distinction, right? Because, you know, when you look at even many of the companies in the room here, some who would have unfortunately been victims of hacks themselves, it's not because of a lack of awareness or a lack of security or a lack of interest, it's because actually they're not prepared as a company or an institution to be hit by nation states like North Korea, which can result in massive losses. But ultimately, who are the victims of these hacks? It's the users, it's the retail, it's the everyday person who's investing their crypto. You know, right now, even now in the United States, there's 1,000 people that are suing Coinbase because they were hacked and they had their accounts infiltrated and their funds stolen. Now, Coinbase are turning around saying, whoa, 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 hang on guys, we weren't hacked. Our technology wasn't breached. You were hacked. This is your problem. I mean, we take a fee when you complete a transaction, but you were hacked, it's your problem. Now, if you actually think about what the implications of that are, what that does is send a very clear message. Only invest what you're willing to lose. And I'm going to say that one again because actually for me that's probably the most important statement I'll make throughout the entire presentation. People will only invest what they are willing to lose. Now that for me flies directly in the face of banking the unbanked, of having a global rollout of crypto that supports a global economy. You know, you can't ask people to do that. You can't ask the billions of people around the world to do it if they're not willing, if they're only willing to put in what they're willing to lose. And I think as an industry, we should be able to identify those issues and try to solve them together. You know, the ETH founder said this year that crypto has been brilliant in allowing the well-capitalized to become even more well-capitalized. And again, for me, that's a far cry away from the vision of banking the unbanked, servicing those who can't be serviced currently. And I think as an industry, we need to try and tackle those issues together. Then, of course, there's the institutions. You know, if we want crypto to be taken seriously by the institutions, if we want them to adopt and drive the mass adoption of blockchain technology, then we have to alleviate their fears and we have to solve that issue around mass adoption. Because their biggest issue isn't volatility. Volatility is expected, especially over the last 12 months, right? You know, volatility is something they can deal with and build into their risk portfolios. No, their biggest concern is security. And that kind of takes us to the technology itself. You know, one of the fantastic things about blockchain technology and about the crypto industry as a whole is it is very leveling. As an individual, when I open my wallet, largely the technology being used is quite similar to that of a corporate. And you know, and you hear, well, the blockchain's very secure, it can't be hacked. Yes, it is, but people are not, right? You know, these unique, fantastic, fallible individuals will always be susceptible to being hacked. And ultimately, that issue's not going to necessarily go away. But what we can do is try to make it easier to prevent people being hacked by acknowledging some of the problems that exist within our industry. And that kind of brings it quite nicely onto loss itself. Because hacking is, of course, a major issue within our industry, but so is loss in general. It's estimated that 20% of all Bitcoin is already gone forever. Not the sounds of a scalable solution if we want it to be adopted by the masses. You know, once crypto is gone, it is gone. And I think we need to work to ensure that certainly individuals that start to enter the market have much better support and means to recover assets in the event that they potentially lose or forget their private keys. I'm sure you've all heard about the guy James in Cardiff who threw away 2 hard drives, you know, with over $500 million worth of Bitcoin on. He's still petitioning Cardiff Council 3 years on. He actually thinks he knows where these hard drives are inside the skip. He's got a team and a budget of £11 million to get this back. But it would have been better if he had a means to recover it in the first place, right? And again, these are issues that we need to tackle and we need to be able to solve. Now, the quote you can see behind me is from a gentleman called Stefan Thomas. He also lost quite a few £1 million through crypto. But he started to challenge the status quo, you know, and it's a message I hear all the time, right? Be your own bank. Fantastic, right? Be your own bank. Sounds like a very illuminating kind of principle to have. But let's actually break that down a little bit more. What does it mean to be your own bank? Let's forget the AML and fraud implications that are needed for a minute. I'll give you an example, right? So I flew into Singapore on Monday. I landed at 5 a.m. after a 13-hour flight. I download the Grab app, because that seems to be the way everybody gets around here in Singapore. My card's declined. I'm like, okay, I know there's money there. I get a notification in my app, your card's being frozen. Why is that? Well, you're in a country you've never been in before. At a time you should, for all intensive purposes, be in bed. We don't know it's you. And it's on an app you've never used before. So I go through and I scan my face, which looks absolutely knackered. Luckily, it still picks it up. It unlocks the card and everything's okay. But none of that exists in our industry. And even if it does, and it's starting to emerge, do individuals really want to be responsible for all of that themselves? No, they don't, right? And even if there's individuals that do, the masses certainly don't. The billions of people around the planet don't. And I think that's something that we do need to acknowledge. Being your own bank is a fantastic principle, but it's not necessarily going to drive scalability and growth. And it's certainly not going to help us with security. And again, I referenced James from Cardiff. By being his own bank, he's lost all of his assets. And I think that's something we have to acknowledge and be aware of. Now, the other problem with being your own bank is it does create some I would say verticals, but they're not, services, right? Crypto hunters. There was a great article on the BBC where this lady had lost access to her wallet, and these two very intelligent techie guys came in and somehow managed to recover her key. And it sounded like a fantastic story until you read the small print, right? All she had to do was give away 20% of everything she earned. I was like, well, it would have been better if she'd had a mechanism to actually recover that in the first place. And then you can go one step further. The crypto hypnotists lie on a sofa for an hour, talk about your first pet, your first school, girlfriend, your favorite color, and suddenly your private key will pop into your head and they can recover it for you. Now, obviously, I use that as jest, but actually, these are services that genuinely exist. And for me, that highlights a fundamental issue that we need to solve, right? If these services are growing in popularity, which they are, then we need to have a mechanism in place which can actually protect people from losing access to their keys and funds in the first place. Now, we all know there's quite a few methods in which you can store your keys, right? And they work, but there's still a fundamental problem. Private keys, seed phrases, they sound fantastic, but life tends to have a way of impacting you when you least expect it. Fire, theft, damage, right? All of these expose huge amounts of assets to potential permanent loss. And then, of course, there's other areas which I don't think gets talked about enough, like succession planning, right? We want crypto to be adopted by the masses. Well, the masses aren't all 20-something people, very young and technologically aware. There's actually a large number of elderly people now entering the industry who are buying crypto for their grandchildren and their children as an investment, right? How do we ensure that succession planning is in place to protect them and their investments going forwards? And I think that brings me quite nicely onto the final point that I highlighted earlier on, in the presentation, the brewing regulatory storm. Now, I'm going to briefly kind of talk you over what I found out, certainly over the last kind of week or so, in regards to this specific point. One of the not so fun things about coming to Singapore for this conference was a 13-hour flight. But the 13-hour flight gave me a great opportunity to actually read the European regulation that's being proposed around crypto. And what was very interesting about this is that it was very, very, very heavily focused on anti-money laundering and ensuring that the proceeds of crypto could not be used to fund cybercrime. Now, these are two, by the way, very laudable areas that we need to cover. But they're actually referenced 16 times. Can anybody guess how many times the protection of individuals from being hacked was mentioned in that regulation? 4. And that, for me, whilst more than 0, still highlights a very interesting area as to where the industry is going to be going to. So I'm aware that I'm running out of time, but I hope that highlights some of the challenges and how we can potentially face that. Ultimately, the mission statement here at Coincover is to make crypto safe for everybody to hold and use. We provide theft protection technology and also private key backup and recovery services. I hope to be able to speak to some of you over at our stand over there, and thank you very much for listening.